Each week, I participate in that most sacred of rituals, grocery shopping. The best part comes when I'm in the checkout line and cannot resist reading the tabloid headlines on my left. Right between those highlighting the latest Kardashian scandal or most recent royal family caper is another that inevitably says something like this: prophecy of doom. World going to end at exactly 5:02 a.m. on December 21st, 2021. Proof inside, along with detailed escape plans for you and your family. Well, I can't help but chuckle to myself and wonder if anybody actually believes that stuff. But then I arrive home and start looking for a relaxing movie to watch. First one I come upon is Tom Hanks' new series called Finch, in which the Earth is portrayed as an uninhabitable wasteland with a consistent temperature of 150 degrees. Then, right below that on the recommended list is one of my favorites, Independence Day, giving equal rights to alien invaders as the force to bring about the end of the world. So I say, okay, this is not working out. I think I'll go write my sermon. So I opened up the Bible to today's gospel reading, and what do I find? But you guessed it, another apocalyptic depiction of the end of the world. Only this prophecy of doom is in the mouth of Jesus, and this one is more difficult to ignore. Our reading from the Gospel of Luke begins, "There will be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, and on the earth distress among nations, confused by the roaring of the seas and the waves. People will faint from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken." Sounds like the nightly news to me. Just on Friday, the WHO cited a new COVID strain named Omicron as a vital concern because of the rapidity with which it spreads. A week ago today, an SUV in Wisconsin plowed through the middle of a Christmas parade, of all things, killing 6 people, injuring 48, many of whom were children. And the deep divisions among Americans continue. All of this gives rise to a world filled with anxiety, similar to what we just heard in our reading this morning. But I believe that underneath all of this anxiety is a fear that our familiar way of being, of living and knowing is passing away, leaving tumult and uncertainty in its wake. This is the first Sunday of Advent. So, what does the end of the world have to do with Advent? What is the connection? That was my task this week, to figure this out. Advent is a season of waiting, preparation, and breathless expectation as we await the coming of the birth of the Christ child. But it is also a time of deepening darkness as our days become shorter and shorter, when we contemplate the shadows and silence, even as we wait for the dawning of new light. This inbreaking of the light into the midst of darkness is represented each time we light a candle on our Advent wreath. The 4 candles around the edges symbolize hope, love, joy, and peace, with the candle in the center representing Christ. On this first Sunday of Advent, our candle symbolizes hope, reminding us that in the midst of the brokenness of our world, in the midst of the distress, confusion, fear, and foreboding that we just heard about, there is hope through the coming of Christ. Hope that pandemics, random deaths, and dire circumstances do not have the final say, hope in a brighter tomorrow, hope that God can and does make all things new. The word Advent is from the Latin adventus, meaning coming. Not has come, not already came 2,000 years ago, but is coming. Present tense. This morning together we begin our wait for the birth of Jesus with the eager anticipation that accompanies any birth. We await the joyful news on Christmas Day of the birth of God incarnate, Jesus the Christ, in a humble dwelling in Bethlehem. But what we often don't remember is that Jesus was born into a world of deep, piercing darkness and uncertainty. For God's chosen people were a conquered people the year Jesus was born. Roman occupiers had imposed a despised universal taxation on the Jewish people. Peasants had lost all of their land. They had lost their homes. They had nowhere to live. There was no calm in Israel when Jesus was born. There was conflict and there was tension. It was a land torn apart by oppression, persecution, and terror. Into the midst of this, in a cold, dark cave used to shelter shepherds and sheep from the elements, a frightened young woman with her husband by her side gave birth to her first child. They named him Jesus, the one we hail as the Messiah, God incarnate, this tiny, squirming Jewish babe wrapped in swaddling clothes. The birth of Christ is just one of the beginnings that we await this season. We also wait for what is traditionally called the second coming, portrayed in our gospel reading today as the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Now, I grew up in the Bible Belt in Tennessee, and that might be why, but I used to see some amazing artistic depictions of this verse of Scripture. In some, Jesus would look like he was surfing in on the clouds. In others, he looks like he's flying through the air like Superman. In others, he's in a chariot, hearkening back to the book of Daniel. But for Luke to have written that the Son of Man, or Jesus, is coming in a cloud is actually first century code. It's code for this Son of Man is God, folks. Wake up. Throughout the Hebrew Scriptures, our Creator is portrayed as leading the people in a cloud. When the Israelites are led into the promised land, it's a cloud that they follow, and that cloud is God. So it's just another way of signaling to his hearers and to us the divinity of the baby whose birth we await. And there's also a third type of coming, which is immediate, palpable, accessible to you and to me. It is Jesus knocking on the door of our hearts right now, begging to be let in. It is the Jesus we see in the eyes of a hopeful guest worshiping with us for the very first time. It is the Jesus we see in the tear-stained face of a friend who has recently lost a loved one, in the heartbreaking plea of an abused man or woman seeking shelter. It is the warmth that we feel when we hold a newborn infant. It is Jesus wanting more than anything to be in relationship with you today, right now, this very moment. It is this coming that sustains us in times of utter despair and rejoices with us in times of abundant joy. It is this coming that is always available to us if only we will open our hearts, open our hands, open our lives. It is this coming that is sometimes experienced in what we call the thin places, those places where the veil between heaven and earth is so thin that we can feel the presence of Jesus in profound and palpable ways. It is in the midst of distress, confusion, fear, and foreboding that is sometimes described in apocalyptic terms, like this morning, that Jesus comes. He comes as a tiny, vulnerable babe whose birth we await. He comes as the Son of Man wrapped in the cloud-like divinity of God. He comes as Spirit longing to be in relationship with you, longing to be led into the hidden, dark, and painful corners of our lives. And we all have those painful corners, don't we? Suffering is part of the human condition, regardless of how much we wish it were not so, how much we try to avoid it, and how much we try to mask it, especially in the sometimes forced merriment of the holiday season. What Jesus is telling us is, don't avoid those painful times. Go straight through them. There is a saying, the only way out is through. Jesus is telling us, I will be right there with you, beside you in those times. You are not alone. As he tells us in the Gospel of Matthew, I am with you always to the close of the age. As we await the coming of Christ and all his manifestations, our gospel reading this morning warns us to be on guard, be alert, lest we miss the miracle that is right in front of us. Be on guard. Will you see Christ and he comes to you? And will you let him in?